Is Tuesday, September 22nd, 2020. This is the Arlington County Board of Equalization hearings. The first case out of order on the agenda is RPC 1405119 at 4420 Fairfax Drive. Withdrawal has been requested by Ms. Borman. We just need to vote and accept it. So would somebody like to make a motion to accept it? Okay, Ms. Hogan. I'll second. All in favor of the withdrawal? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. That is withdrawn. The second case is Economic Unit 1703903A at 1201 North Pierce Street. Ms. Borman would also like to withdraw this. Mr. Matskin has made a motion to accept. I'll second. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Okay, unanimous. Ms. Borman, both cases have been withdrawn. Thank you. Okay, third up, this is going to be a quick day today. RPC, the first case on the agenda, 340230003. They late last night, accepted the reduction from the county. So on that, I guess we have to acknowledge the withdrawal. So, you know, just to keep it tidy, I'll motion to accept. Do I have a second? Okay, Ms. Hogan, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then just while we're on a roll, we might as well go to the fourth on the agenda, RPC 1500758 at 2000 North Adams Street. Mr. Chitlick has just told us that they've accepted the county's offer. So again, same thing for tidy. I'll accept the withdrawal. Do I have a second? Okay, Ms. Hogan, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. All righty. So that wipes out 4 of the 6 cases, and we will move along to the remaining 2.
Mary, sorry, I don't know if it matters. We didn't receive an offer from the county. We just straight withdrew it. So I don't know if that changes any procedure or anything for you. No. Okay.
You just withdrew, but did it go?
They did not make us an offer, but we decided to withdraw the case.
Okay, so there was no county recommended?
No, we confirmed it.
Okay, all right, well then, to restate that for the minutes then, so that is a straight withdrawal. I would assume it will all stay the same. This is again on RPC 1500758. I motion to accept the withdrawal now. Ms. Hogan, just a second. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, it's unanimous. Again, thank you, Mr. Chitlick. Okay, so next up for discussion is the second case on the agenda, RPC 140446261. This is property located at 818 North Quincy Street. Mr. Chitlick representing the owners. Mr. Chitlick, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about the property.
Thank you. I'm hoping because of all the withdrawals, I can have an hour and a half here to go through this. But just in case, I'll try to keep it to 8 minutes. So the property is an equity residential property. We've all been through these enough to know that you're going to see increased expenses over the years. And that's, of course, occurred here. The big issue here is that the submitted 2019 expenses included an expense line item for casualty loss, which the assessor said, I don't agree with it, and just removed it. So you, again, will have a normal column and then a column E that you're used to seeing, which is the operating 2019, and then the assessor who reconstructed the operating 2019. And I say that because it's not a true reconstruction. What they did instead for column F was accept everything except said this number is too high, let me pull some out of that. And what they pulled out of that was $341,000. And I want to explain in great detail what that is and why that's there and why it needs to continue to be there. It's casualty loss. What casualty loss is what that was specifically is there were 3 incidents at the property of water damage and leakage that took place. They had a roof leak, and let me read you the incident report. Well, first one was a smaller one. It was a dishwasher leak that came into the hallways. It affected basically the hallways from floor 20 to 30. It was a leak on the 20th floor that basically dripped down to each level of the apartment that was above the apartments ending in 07 and 09, and it leaked all the way down, every single unit on the way down. Of course, that you would say, well, that's a one-time deal. That's not something that's reoccurring. And then the other was an HVAC leak in the HVAC closet that caused water flooding in some apartments. Carpets and baseboards were soaked. The big one was that there was extensive rain and it flooded the building. And I'll read you from the loss description. All elevator panels, 3 cabs were blown and not operable. Stairwell from rooftop. Lobby damaged. Drywall on 22 floors. Rooftop hallways from floors 22 through 8. Water damage and drywall carpets, all apartment drywall and carpet damage. And it's, again, the assessor's position is, well, that happened once, you fix it and you're done. The problem is it happened once and it's going to happen again, so there's a cost to remediate that. If I came to the assessor, and I have, and said, look, our roof is leaking, we need a new roof, they say, well, you get replacement reserves, there's no issue there, you need a new roof, that's fine. And then if we put $5 million to replace a new roof, I say, yeah, but that was a one-time charge. You're not going to have to do that again. So what this is annual, year-over-year recurring issues that are going to happen until a huge capital expenditure goes to basically replace every pipe in the building and the roof of the building. So what this cost is not to fix those issues. It's to fix the issues caused by those issues. So it's your apartment flooded. That cost is to fix the flooded apartment, but it's not to fix what caused the flooded apartment. So by ignoring the cost to fix it, the issue that it caused, and ignoring the issue shows that they're just pretending like it never happened. And trust me, if the owner could say, look, I just don't want the roof to leak, so it won't leak, isn't really how it works. So it needs to be considered somewhere, and the county isn't considering it in any place. We've considered it by using the actual operating cost, which is you have 2 choices. You fix the problem and then you don't have this casualty loss, or you have the casualty loss, you don't fix the problem. So we're showing the history here of this is what it's costing, this is what it's doing, and it's a year-over-year issue until the major problem's fixed, which is to tear up every apartment to replace the piping and to replace the roof is a 8-figure change in evaluation in the cost to do it on a $100 million property. So that's really the difference between the columns on here, because if you just used like what's been done a lot, if you just looked at basically column E, you'll see that the expenses were 2.7 million, which is 33%, which is in line with a lot of properties. We thought about keeping the last case open just so you could see the 35% or 30+% operating expenses that a normal property reports. The assessor's taken this and said, yes, I see that you're at 33%, but it's a bump. I'm using 28%. So again, it's a bit of a miss on our part, we think, by the assessor, just to ignore that and pretend like it not only didn't happen, but it won't happen in the past without a major remediation issue. There was a lot of email exchanges that we had with the assessor, but that's really the gist of the property. It's a nicer, well-located property for sure. It's got like kind of that mid-rise, high-rise look to it that a lot of these properties have. Built in 2007, and they're having this major leak issue that's becoming a pretty big problem throughout. So that's the issue in the case, is you've got a major issue that you're not addressing, and I say you as in the assessor, and it needs to be addressed somewhere. And just by taking out the cost of the issue is not fixing that problem in any way. So the last step that I want to talk about is actually on our page 55, and I hate to jump around, but it's the CoStar 5-star properties of 2010 or newer. What we did was said, tell us the best properties in Arlington, and we pulled those and we looked at it and saw how they were assessed. And you'll see there how those properties are assessed as compared to the subject, which is assessed at $481,000 per unit for a 2007 build property with a major issue. And you look at some of the other properties on the list, the Maxwell Virginia Square Towers, built in 2013. The Maxwell's built in 2014. 333 a unit, 467. This property, from what we found, is the 4th highest assessed per unit high-rise apartment in Arlington, which obviously we have a bit of an issue with, considering that it doesn't get rents anywhere near that level. So we often talk about location, and there should be adjustment for location, and the response is, well, you get an adjustment in the rents because you can't charge as much. Well, if that's true, if we're looking at a price per unit and there's a 2015 property and they can charge more, then where's the miss? What's going on here? You got Origin at Boston Quarter, which is assessed a little bit less than we are, built in 2017, a 406 unit building, substantially nicer, gets much higher rents. The reason I think that these properties are assessed so much higher is it's pretty simple, actually. It's because the expense rate that they're using on there is because of this equity expense history that's been punishing them for years, that we've addressed and still hasn't been picked. The other one across the street, the View at Liberty Center, I know you all know that property pretty well because I brought it in front of you before. It's assessed at 438. It's extremely comparable to the property, a tad bit bigger, but almost the identical assessment. So that's the issue with the case. The last thing I want to touch upon, sorry, as I scroll up electronically here, is the NOI at the property. Last year it's been 625959, and as you understand, a lot of that has to do with the reporting. The reporting now is 54. The assessor said no, I think it actually should be 57. Well, despite the fact that the NOI is down about 10%, the assessment's up again, of course. No cap rate change, but the assessment's up over $3 million. There's no reason this assessment should climb. And as we be super fast, as we fix the expense issue that we've got at the properties, we've said that we'll see that next year. We'll see that next year. Well, despite the expense issue being fixed, the assessments continue to increase. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Representing the county, Mr. Chikas.
Good morning, board members. Good morning, Mr. Chitlick. Good morning, Mr. Warren. Speaking about the Liberty Towers, we'll be focusing primarily on page 3, the mixed use income and expense summary sheet. Looking at the property, we can see the performance is doing well. Apartment revenues up 2 years in a row, increase year over year. 2019's increase at 2.3%. Parking revenues up 2 years in a row, 6.5% in 2019. Other revenues up almost 1% in 2019. RUBS, or utility reimbursements, up just shy of 7% in 2019. Total revenue has been up 3 years in a row, year over year over year. 2019's increase was 2.1%. True vacancy is stable, 3-year average of 3.2%. If you include concessions, again, it's stable, 3-year average of 3.4%. Effective gross is also up 3 years in a row, growth year over year over year. 2019's growth at 2.6%. As Mr. Chitlick pointed out, increase in operating expenses as we've seen with the equity cases, 3 years in a row of operating expense increases, 15% in 2017, 8% in 2018, and 39% in 2019. We did see a 3-year average, approximately 2.149 or 2.150. Net operating income was down about 9.1% in 2019, but again, a 3-year average of 5.816. When we look at what the county did in regards to the projections made prior to receiving the 2019 income and expense questionnaire from the owner, the board's seen this before numerous times, equity or otherwise. We underprojected almost across the board, underprojected gross potential income by 58,000 or 0.7%. We underprojected effective gross by 302,000 or just shy of 4%. Underprojected operating expenses by about 848,000 or 31%, and overprojected NOI by 545,000 or almost 10%. When we look at the INE summary and we look at specifically columns E and F, that's the E being the operating year 2019 as submitted by the owner, and F being the reconstruction by the county. One thing I think we need to make clear is that we learned as much about this project's casualty loss in the first 5 minutes of this case as you guys did, and we've had this case for 4 or 5 months. The reason I say that is because we can look through the internet, the email history between the agents, Ms. Ross, Mr. Chitlick, and myself. We reached out to the agents on July 7th to inquire about some of these costs. We heard back on July 16th. That was the first time we heard of what this casualty loss was. We replied back 7 days later on the 23rd and asked exactly what is this casualty loss? How is it made up? What is it made up of? How is this money spent? Didn't hear anything back. Replied on August 25th, so a full month later, and asked again, what is the $341,151 associated with the casualty loss? And both times we were told that it was in regards to the increase in property insurance at the property. Because as you'll note on the summary sheet itself, that was the other large increase. Maintenance and repair went up 104% in 2019, and the subtotal for insurance and tax went up 178%. So we thought there might be some correlation between the extremely large increase in insurance and tax and the casualty loss. But we didn't hear back until this morning in regards to what exactly the casualty loss was. Not to put words in Mr. Chitlick's mouth, but we would agree with his summation that it's a one-time operating expense. This isn't an annual operating expense that's to be incurred by the owner of the property. As he noted himself, if the roof needed to be changed, that's why you'd have capital improvements, because that's something that would be an actual, something that would add long liveness to the age of the property itself. So as opposed to patch and repair, it's something that you would actually replace. So it's not so much that we didn't want to include casualty loss for a operating expense that was an appropriate operating expense. It was more that we didn't get word back until this morning about what that operating expense was after 3 occasions that we reached out to find out exactly what the casualty loss was. So really what we're looking at is a smoothing out, if you will, by not including that number in column F. As we both agreed, Mr. Chitlick and I, that that's not an annual operating expense. That's not something that you would expect to see year over year, $341,000 increase in your expenses. So again, if you look back at the 3-year history to include 17, 18, and even if you were to include column E, you would see that that's something that should be smoothed out over the 3-year history, as opposed to there's an expectation that the operating expenses are going to increase again 39% next year. We did a test with this newfound information. Again, as the board has seen before, we took the rent roll that was provided by the owner, saw that we were drastically under projecting what was achievable as far as the rental side for the apartments. We did include the committed affordable component, which to our discredit, we did not include on the January 1st test. You can see that in column G2. There's 6 committed affordable units, 229 market. Retail essentially stayed the same. We did make that test in columns G1, G2, and G3. We did increase the operating expenses to be more reflective of the last 3-year history. But again, we also made changes to reflect the revenue side of what's going on at the property, considering it's doing well 3 years in a row. We found that there was a change reflective of less than 1.5% of what was put out by the county on January 1st. Again, the board is familiar with our processes as far as with being within 3% of the January 1st. We did not make a change. But if we were to make a note, just to point out the NOI as projected by the appellant in columns H1 and H2 is some $380,000 less than what was achieved in 2019, which was its lowest achieving year in 4 years. So if we're looking at a snapshot of reality, we're not sure that the appellant's numbers, the projection made for the net operating income is really reflective of what's been going on at the property itself. We do believe that although a bit aggressive in regards to its initial projection, once you look at column E, we do believe that, again, when looking at the test in comparison to the original projection made, that you'll see that, again, acknowledging that the casualty loss and some of these other one-time events, if you will, in their operating history is something that should be considered. As we talked about ad nauseum, with regards to the Virginia Code, the board, of course, is empowered to consider the actuals. If you were to consider the actual operating expenses, we just ask you to also consider how how underestimated the revenue side was made by the county. So again, if we were to make an adjustment to the operating expenses, we ask you to keep that in mind when you see how much we underprojected the effective gross at this well-stabilized property. That being said, we do believe that based upon the test, based upon the 1 year bump up in expenses, and based upon the revenue side of things year over year over year, that the county should be confirmed on 113,157,400. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Questions from board members? No questions? Mr. Hoffman.
Yeah, I was looking through, Jeremy, did you ever get an estimate on the roof replacement?
I did not. We did not get an estimate. We got the questions from Chris. I think there were 9 of them, and we responded with like a page and a half, including snapshots of internal documents. But then he followed up with 6 more questions, which we answered, and then there was another round of questions, which at that point we were close enough to the hearing that we decided that we weren't going to be able to satisfy all the requests after the 15 plus responses, so we didn't get it. And no, I don't have the actual final number for the roof. But the big thing is, it's not just the roof, it's the piping. The roof costs what it costs, and that's expected. It's the pulling out piping that would otherwise be good and replacing it all is the biggest concern here.
Do you have an estimate?
I don't, and any developer is gonna need to know what that is before they would pay full market for this property.
So your approach is just to capitalize the annual flood damage cost and use that as what would detract the value of the property if it was in good condition?
I mean, correct. Yeah. So that's column E, and I'm not saying we need to use every penny of column E, but the assessment decided the original assessment is almost exactly $600,000 in income, which has only been achieved in A. So the column D is actually a bit more than B and C. It's basically right on it. But then they learned that the actual income's 5.4, and he said, well, yeah, but that's over. It should actually have been 5.7. The assessment's based off 6, and he's saying, but it's fair. So yeah, we don't need to say take 100% of it, but it needs to be considered somewhere.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Matzkin?
I'm going to be quick and go back on mute because there's somebody cutting the lawn outside. For the appellant, so you have a 13-year-old roof and 13-year-old pipes that are acting much, much, much older. So your anticipation, it's surprising and disappointing, but this is the first that they've really shown up. First question, but you're anticipating it's long-term if you can't do something. First question is this $300,000 or more, this is after insurance proceeds?
Yes, this is the net. This is the net of it. That's the final cost. The problem with insurance on a building like this is that the deductible is so high that the insurance, it needs to be a pretty sizable amount to really put the insurance claim in for a building this size. I mean, the insurance is really for catastrophic type issues for the most part. So yes, this is the net final cost
Out of pocket
for the incident report, right?
Okay.
And I tell you, it maybe there is some insurance cost to it because the final numbers were for the 3 incidents were 30,000, 16,000, and 25,000 even. So it's very possible that it costs much more than that, but that's where the limit hit.
Well, how does that relate to the 300,000 excess operating costs this year? You just added up to about 50,000.
No, 300,000, 25,000, and 16,000. I added a 341.
I misheard. Okay.
Yep, those are the 3 incidents.
FYI, there are solutions, and I am a party to one of them where you can line the water pipes. 13 years old, you shouldn't have to do it, but instead of ripping up the entire building and replacing the pipes for a small fraction of the cost, you can get a bona fide company to line them. It's what Arlington County does in its sewer system underground, and you ought to consider that. And we could talk offline if you want to know more.
I'd be happy to. I'm sure there's a cost associated with you to consider, but yeah, I would love to.
Yeah.
Okay, but final question.
And the other, and I have a question for the department. You had stated that a lot of these casualty costs you just found out about when we found out about them Now that you know more than you did yesterday, is it still your opinion, is for the department again, still your opinion that these are one-time costs and shouldn't affect very much the annual operating expenses for
That's
this year?
correct. Yeah, I mean, it was
Yeah.
even essentially stated by Mr. Chitlick. These aren't anticipated costs. These aren't things that are expected to be occurring on an annual basis. This is something that happened after 13 years, and now it's either been patched or replaced. I'm not sure if he expressed how it was fixed, but this isn't something that was paid for last year, 2 years ago, and it's not expected to be paid for next year.
Yeah, I
Chris said
just
that
wanted to
twice, and
reiterate.
that's not what I said. Can I clarify what I said since you
Sure.
mentioned it twice? I said if we don't fix it, if the nothing is fixed here, they will be reoccurring annual expenses, and the assessment's based off of it not being fixed. So that's what I said. I said if we fix it, it goes away, but there's a huge cost of fixing it. If we don't fix it, that's an annual reoccurring expense. And obviously, it's not just the expense associated with this
Okay,
place.
okay. You've clarified it. Thank you ever so much. Any final questions from board members? No? Okay, Mr. Chikas, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yes, ma'am. Again, so looking at the property on the revenue side, things are going well. Growth year over year. It's a stabilized property, 3.2% true vacancy, 3.4% when you include concessions. Effective gross up, the income's up 3 years in a row. If you were to include the 39% increase in operating expenses, the county just asks you to keep in mind that, again, by the acknowledgement of the appellant, $341,000 of that is not an annual operating expense. Hence why we reconstructed column F. If you were to use those numbers, smooth them out over the 3-year history, again, come up with a total operating expense much more in line with our test. As we saw with our test, if you're to increase the operating expenses, please keep in mind the huge under projections on the revenue side made by the county. We do believe that that test confirmed our initial assessment of $113,157,400. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chitlick, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yes, he keeps talking about the income, and you've got to look at the income. The income was $5,453,000, and if you determine, you know what, that includes something it shouldn't include, we're throwing 100% of that cost out. He shows column F as $5,795,000. His column G, adding the three together, is over $5.9 million. He's using income $1.2 million higher than the property achieved. Even if you're going to say you can't have any of that $341,000, that incident never happened. So then him to say, please look at, if you're going to look at the increase in expenses, look at the increase in income, fine, please do. Look at the whole thing. Column E or column F are really what I was looking between, of where should that number be? Do we accept it, do we not? But column G is basically putting more weight onto A, B, and C. If we talk about trends in the past, the income's down 4 years in a row. The total NOI is down 4 years in a row. Granted, they were stable for 2, but 6.1, 5.9, 5.9, and now it's, if you take their number, it's basically 5.8. He's using 5.9. So if we look at trends, it should be below column F. If we're looking at most recent years, it should be below column F. But either way, the test doesn't have any support.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. All right, it's just among the board members. I will say, I mean, Mr. Chitlick just basically said what I was going to say here. I mean, I look at the test, and you know, while it came down, I mean, it's still at 5.9. And when you look at when they adjusted column F, it's substantially above that. I mean, it's interesting because Mr. Chica said, you know, the board has the ability, you know, under the code to look at actual expenses. I think it's a little high myself. I don't know. I'll be interested to see what other folks think. You know, I think it's great that they pulled out the affordables, all of that, but I still think the test is slightly high based on the performance of the property. What's other people think? Mr. Hoffman.
I do too. I mean, I don't think this is a property that's like on a rapid upward trajectory. I think I'd look more at 2019 actuals and 2018 than, or maybe a 3-year average than the test column.
Yeah, other.
I wish I had a more concrete estimate of, the contractors looked at the roof and here's what it costs, the contractors look at the pipe and here's what it costs, because I'd be willing to consider kind of a below the line deduction if that was the case, but I'm not going to guess what those issues are and how much they cost.
Yeah, I would agree there. And I mean, I think that, all buildings have roofs, all buildings have pipes. And like Mr. Matzkin said, I mean, it is kind of interesting that you're looking at a property that's, at this age and having this type of work. That's one of the reasons that we do have reserves in there to do capital improvements, so I'm not necessarily looking to do something below the line on that. I think that's a cost of doing business. They've got to do, capital improvements and repairs and whatnot. I just, again, think the income is high on the test. Mr. Lawson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, I was kind of thinking that if we had more information on the piping, and my understanding, because we had to focus on this at our condo, is there was certain suppliers that the pipes just weren't properly built or whatever, and they start having these pinhole leaks, and then you've got to tear into walls and replace. And so I think if that were more clearly established, then I think I would be more with the applicant. I do understand that. I mean, it's a significant thing if in fact it's that bad a situation. On the roof, you patch roofs and then eventually you replace the whole thing and then you don't have to patch it. So I'm not as persuaded by the issue with the roof, but I could be with the piping.
Okay, other comments? Mr.
Yeah,
Penranda?
I was looking also, I thought it was a little high to start with the initial number, but looking at the NOIs, I wasn't really too persuaded to make an adjustment, even though I made some numbers. By increasing the expenses on the apartment side only and leaving the affordables and the retail the same, it was a minor increase, but it does reduce the assessment below last year's. So I'm not really too excited to make that change. I'm more inclined to accept the county's revision.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Matzkin?
I'd like to hear a little bit more from Mary Dooley on what you might suggest to get the revenue, which we all kind of feel might be a little high, what you might adjust it to and why. And that's it.
It's far off. Your mic's
Mary, you're muted.
Yep. What I did, I assume is similar to what Mr. Penranda did. I took the average, like Mr. Hoffman said, if we could look at, 18 and 19, I took the average of those 2 years and then assumed, just like Mr. Penranda had said, assumed that the difference of the apartments, the affordable and the retail was correct. Then when I cap that out, I end up at 108,907,000, which is probably similar to what Mr. Penranda did. And that is lower than last year. So I don't know.
right. Yeah, I come up with 108, 831. That to me, it's really a very small difference. So that's why I'm more convinced and accepted, what Mr. Chica said. I think the numbers are there, and I don't think it's a building that is really going down the hill. So
I don't think it's going downhill, but I don't think it's necessarily, flying up. And I don't think it's close. 108 million versus 111 million. That's $3 million. I think that's a substantial difference. But, I don't know what what everybody on the board thinks. I mean, if we all think it's too high, the 108 is too low. Based on last year, we could also look at last year's assessment at the 110.
I would go to last year and then if the appellant brings next year more information on the roof issues that we can actually quantify, then maybe we'll go further.
Yeah, I agree with Greg. I'd be fine with last year's.
I'd also just extend Greg's thought that 1 year of these unusual maintenance costs is just one data point. If indeed Mr. Chitlick's projection that this is going to be an annual cost until they outlay significant money, and for a variety of reasons, not just the roof, then we might start considering that the building's not worth as much as we think. But 1 year is not enough. Next year, be interested to see what happens.
Right, I agree. I think the roof, the pipes, that's a whole separate issue. I mean, I'm just kind of basing this on the actual income of the property. And so, doing my test that ended up at 108 million, I think that's too low. So I could certainly support, making it equal to last year's, as a test. Mr. Lawson, it looked like you had something to say.
Yes, ma'am. I'm good with the proposal as well.
All right.
Okay.
I'll make a motion then to reduce the county's assessment to 110, 9,900.
I'll second.
Okay, a motion, a second by Ms. Hogan. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. It's reduced to last year's assessment at 110,009,900. Okay, thank you. Okay, next case on the agenda is, and I did see Mr. Warren, I believe. Yep, there he is. RPC 18003-111 at 1200 North Beach Street. Mr. Warren, I don't see your camera. Is your audio on? Okay. Okay, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about the property.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm going to start on our summary of facts on page 55 of 214 of the assessor's board memo. This is Cortland Towers. It's one RPC. It's currently assessed at a value of $216,462,400, or $376,000 a unit. The value we're requesting from the board today is $212,691,900, which is $369,000 a unit. The county is recommending no change currently. This property is a high-rise in the Clarendon Courthouse area, built in 1989 originally, 575 total units. It's a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units, and also includes a variety of furnished units as well. If you turn to page 3, you'll see the mixed use income and expense summary and the historical reported financials for the property. And initially, what you'll see, and you'll find that in the assessor's comments on page 2 as well, is that the county was under projecting both GPI and EGI in their initial analysis, but also substantially under projecting operating expenses. So their EGI was approximately $200,000 below what was actually reported in 2019, but their total operating expense estimate, and they were using initially for the departments of 24%, was approximately $400,000 below what was actually reported. And you'll see in there, or the historical actuals for the operating expenses specifically, was almost 27% in 2016, down 23% in 17, 25% in 18, and 26% most recently in 2019. Now, you'll see columns F1 and F2, the county's test column. And so what the county did is in their test column, they did, we feel appropriately, revise their operating expenses up to 26%. However, in their test column, they then increased both the GPI for the apartments well above what was actually reported in 2019 and well above anything that's been reported in the last 4 consecutive years dating back to 2016. Total GPI calculation in their test column is now 309,000 above what was actually reported in most recently in 2019, and over 719,000 above what the EGI, or effective gross income, in their test column is now 719,000 above what was actually reported in 2019 as well. So that's now the main issue is in their test column they fixed the operating expenses, but then they substantially increased their test column GPI and EGI estimates well above anything the property's ever produced. You'll see that the actual NOI combined in column E that was reported in 2019 was 11,628,329. The assessor's original estimate combined for both the commercial D1 and D2 and the apartment was 11.82 million. And then following their test column, that increased after they saw that what was actually reported was 11.6 million. It increased from 11.82 to 12.26 million in their test column combined. So I think we feel that the test column missed the mark a little bit on the projected income, and which is why we're asking for a revision specifically to the gross potential income and the effective gross income. I know Chris had asked a number of questions detailing this property as well with regard to some of the increase to certain expense columns, specifically the admin expense categories and the payroll. We provided detailed breakdowns. I think that was starting on page, you can see some of our responses. There's one on page 14 of 214 is where we started that off. But there's a list, and you'll see a breakdown of both the administrative payroll expenses as well as some clarification on why the vacancy was higher. This property, as in some of the similar properties we've discussed with Ditmar in prior weeks, has been going through some modernization of some units as they turn over. Again, it's being done to stay competitive with the market and maintain the current rents. And that's why you're seeing a bit higher actual vacancy. But again, it's pretty much right in line. The county is using 7% per their guidelines. What was actually reported is 9.7% most recently in 2019. But again, upon review of the test column, we feel that the county is overestimating their gross potential income for the property. Jeremy, I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
Yeah, I mean, just reiterating how kind of shocking page 3 is when you see that the last 4 years of NOI are 10.6, 10.7, 10.4, 10.6, and the assessor was originally using 11.8. So he was using a number higher than the property's ever achieved. We said, look, here's the income's at 11.6. And he replied with, okay, well, then I'll use 12.26. At first, I thought it was just a calculation error. So we recalculated the test column, and it does calculate down to that. But there's just nothing here that could possibly justify that. And the one thing, because on the last case, we went back to a prior year. In 2017, the income was 11.7. This year, the income's 11.6. I point that out because that 2016 was used for 2018. The value was 191 million. The value on this property has gone 187, 191. Last year was 207, and this year it's 216. So we've gone up $9 million in value with a nominal change in income. It just doesn't make any sense. And then if the assessor is using his test as a base for next year, we might see another $7 million increase next year. This is a Ditmar property, as we've discussed, who have more efficient in a lot of things they do than really anybody else can do because of their scale and the way they're set up. So to use the numbers that he's using of his income, I know we just look at the apartment income, but if you take both F1 and F2 together, he's implying that they can get 17.8 million in GPI for this property, when again, it's never sniffed that. So it just doesn't make any sense.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Cheekas?
Thank you, board members. I would assume that if someone were looking at just 2016, 17, and 18, that they would never assume that the property could achieve what it achieved in 2019, and yet it did. 6% increase on the property revenue alone, apartment revenue alone, 49% increase on retail revenue, 100% increase on other revenue, 18% increase on RUBS or utility reimbursement. We've heard this time and again from the appellants, and it just doesn't quite make sense to the county. Each year, previous to the one prior to that, it did better than the year before. So in other words, with properties that achieve success year over year over year over year, this is going to happen. 2017 had more apartment revenue and GPI than had ever been established at the property. Again, higher apartment revenue and GPI than had ever been established at the property in 2018. And they did it again in 2019. So apartment revenue has been up 3 years in a row, year over year over year. 2019's increase was over 6%, 3-year average of over 16 million. Gross potential income is up 3 years in a row, up year over year over year. 2019's increase up over 6%, 3-year average of 16.8. Although again, the vacancy is increasing, as was pointed out by Mr. Warren. This is done through management decision to modernize and renovate the apartments that are inside the property. And that's verified through the history. 4%, 3.8% vacant in 2016, 4.2% in 2017, 5% in 2018, then it jumped almost doubled to 10% in 2019. We see a 3-year average of approximately 6.3% if we're looking at, again, year 17 through 19. Even with that management-induced vacancy increase, we saw the effective gross was also up 3 years in a row. So apartment revenue is up 3 years in a row. Gross potential is up 3 years in a row. Effective gross is up 3 years in a row. 2019's increase of 3.1%. Again, you've heard me say this before, they're doing more with less. So even with more vacancy at the property, their apartments are renting for more money per unit, and they're getting more money as a property in total. Even when you consider the operating expenses were up 6.6%. Again, this is much more smoothed out over the last 4 years as compared to previous property. So when we're looking at a 3-year average, we see that we're about 3.8 million or 24.9%, say 25% of effective gross. Net operating income was up 1.9% in 2019 with a 3-year average of just about 11.6. Again, as the board has seen before, when you look at columns D1 and D2 is what we had prior to receiving column E, the operating year 2019 INE. And we saw that we underprojected almost across the board. We underprojected 977,000, almost $1 million underprojection of gross potential income. So 6% for 2020 real property assessment. We underprojected over $200,000 of short revenue on the effective gross income side. We did underproject almost $400,000 for operating expenses, and that led to an overprojection of $195,000 for the net operating income. But that's still within 1.7% of what was actually achieved at the property. So again, you've heard us talk about the Virginia Code. If we were to make changes to the operating expenses, obviously we'd ask you to keep the increases on the revenue side year over year over year in place in mind while you adjust if you were to. Jeremy talked a lot about the test, Mr. Warren and Ms. Chitlick talked a lot about the test columns F1 and F2. But that's just there to test that information that we received vis-a-vis the 2019 INE. In regards to the original projection made by the county, what we found was that, again, these are fairly modest increases, as was last case. So when you look at the projections made by the county, we're talking about 1.84%, 1.8% growth in apartment revenue. That's after 4.8% in 17. 1.3% in 18 and 6% in 19. So 1.8% is fairly modest. Total gross potential income projection of 1.8%, again, less than a third of what occurred last year at 6% growth at the property. 1.3 in 18, and again 4.4% 17. We did increase our projection for effective gross, but again, there's the belief that the monetization is taking place at the property, and as that continues, the units obviously will free up and will generate more revenue for the owners, as has been done historically, as we've seen in years 17, 18, and now 19. We did make adjustments, increase our projections for operating expenses up to 26% of effective gross on the apartment side. And yet, as was pointed out, that still came out to an increase overall as a projection made vis-a-vis the projection made by the county for January 1st, 2020 assessment. So as we don't make a recommendation for a increase without a third-party appraisal, we do believe that this information confirms what we saw in regards to the metrics at the property. Revenue is up year over year over year. Expenses are fairly stable, and we see that there was growth on the revenue side as well as the net operating income side. We do believe that based upon looking at the actuals in years 17, 18, 19, that the county should be confirmed at a value of $216,462,400. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Any questions from board members? Mr. Matskin?
For the appellant, on the 2019 numbers that were actually the actual reported 2019 numbers, see that there's a good bump up in the apartment revenue and about the same in terms of dollars bump up in vacancies. And we understand vacancies are artificially high, but for good reasons, improving the property. But I was surprised going back to the revenue relative to the prior 3 years. It's a good solid bump up. Is it purely just the rents went up on all the various units that came up for release? Is that how that happened? And I'm getting to a point based on that response.
This is Greg Rains with Ditmar Company. Yeah, that increase really was more on the market. I mean, for the year in 2019, we only had completed about 55 of these units, and they were at the end of the year. So we weren't seeing premiums on these units that would reflect a year-long increase in overall rent. Those units weren't driving the increase. It was really just the market in that area, in the courthouse area, was moving up the normal rent increases.
I'm sorry, I didn't. You got 55 at the end of the year. I think you broke up a little, or my ears broke up. Could you repeat that, please?
Yes, sir. I was saying that we only had 55 units completed at Cortland Towers by the end of 2019. So the revenue achieved and the premium achieved by those units would have been offset by the time they were on market getting modernized. So that wasn't what drove the increase in rent. It was just the market in the courthouse area moving up.
Just generally speaking.
Yeah.
Okay. So in my follow-on question, which I alluded to already, was, do you expect that kind of increase, which is reflected by the test, column F1, to continue? I mean, it's clearly not as percentage-wise as big of an increase, but I mean, it just occurs to me this might be a one-time bump up of expected rents that can't sustain itself.
It will definitely not sustain itself. We are not. I think what Blake or Jeremy said is accurate. What we're seeing is that these modernizations maintain rent. We are, when you don't renovate units in the RB corridor, you turn into a value play, right? So you're just marketing yourself as a great location, and you'll discount your rent to get folks in the building. To achieve the rents that we were achieving in this market with all the new product, we had to modernize to stay in that realm. So no, this will not be an extended bump in rent. I can tell you actually this property is seeing decreases in rents, but that's neither here nor there for this, I don't think, for this meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Mr. Yates? Can you unmute your microphone, please?
Just curious to the appellant, how many units did you say were renovated this year so far?
You said 55 of the 575.
This year?
This year's which year? 2020?
Yes. I'm looking at a pattern.
Yeah, Ms. Jason, we average about, to complete, we average about 15 to 18 units a month that are completed. So for this year, we're probably
150,
140, 130, 150 in that range.
Okay, and I understand that really doesn't apply to this, but if you're saying that's what you're doing to maintain rents, I was looking just curious to see what you're doing, where the rents might be going forward, given that type of maintenance requirement to maintain that revenue. But okay, thank you.
Okay, any final questions? Okay, Mr. Chikas, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Absolutely. So if I understood correctly, per Mr. Raines and questions from Mr. Matskin, the growth in apartment revenue, 4.8% in 17, 1.3% in 18, and 6% in 19 were pre-modernization, which would lead me to believe that they were doing quite well before modernizing and renovating their units. So given that this has been a DITMAR play, most of the board members are aware of DITMAR success in the region, we believe that it makes sense that the revenue side is going to continue to increase, considering that they had these increases before modernization. So as far as keeping up with the Joneses, they've been doing quite well. Given that the operating expenses are fairly stable, we've seen growth 3 years in a row on the revenue side for apartments, gross potential, and effective gross. We do believe that the county should be confirmed at $216,462,400. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Warren, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yes, Mr. Chikas has made several references about the GPI and the EGI going up over each of the last 3 years, but the bottom line is that the NOI has basically remained stagnant over that same time period. The NOI that was actually reported in most recently in 2019, 11.62, is below what was reported 2 years ago in 2017 at 11.7. So it's kind of been around that same level. So now the county is saying that GPI and EGI are going to continue to rise, but have made no mention that really NOI has remained pretty flat. And their original assessment uses an NOI estimate of $11.82 million, which is far above $200,000 above what was most recently reported in 2019 and above anything that's been reported dating back to 2016 at the property. So again, when you just look at the bottom line, the NOI this property has not been able to achieve what's currently being estimated.
In that same period, the 2-year period, that assessment has grown by over 10%.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Okay, it's just among the board members, and I'll start. I mean, I heard a lot going back and forth from the county saying, oh, these are just modest, it's got all kinds of growth potential, and I couldn't disagree more. I mean, I look at this and think, I look at the test alone, I mean, to use 12.2, it's never achieved that. And, we're not looking at what it's going to make in years coming. We're looking at, from a standpoint of equalization of what it's done historically and assessed off of that. I mean, based on that test column, I think Mr. Chica said, oh, it's just there to, confirm numbers. I mean, that would increase the assessment $17 million over last year. I mean, I think the test is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, if you look at the 4-year average, I mean, I went through and just did a 2-year average of 18 and 19. And, that average, as opposed to the test using 12.2, is 11.5. I mean, if you do a 4-year average, it comes out to 11.3. And without 19, which is what everybody else was assessed at, it only comes in at 11.2. So, I think it's overassessed. I mean, I went through, I did the average of 18 and 19. I removed the retail, I capped it out, and then added the retail back in, and I come in at 210, 908, 883, which is an increase over last year, which I think, is fine. I mean, I think to go from 207 to 210, but I think the assessment going to 216 is way too high based on the performance and based on the numbers. Mr. Hoffman?
Yeah, 100% agree. I did the same thing, but I did a 3-year NOI average and came up with 212 million, just below the appellant's requested number. So I'd support a reduction as well. And I wanted to point out, last year the department, we sat down and reviewed this case, and the department recommended that we reduce the assessment from 212 to 207, and we accepted that recommendation. And now they're saying the building's worth $9 million more than last year, and I just don't see it. So I'm with you on that. My only question is, do we go with the appellant's number, or should we even go further with what you came up with, Mary?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll be honest. I think that it's almost 211. 211 is more in line with where the property's performing.
Yeah.
I like what Mary's done. That's kind of the direction I was looking at too. It's way out. It's getting out of line.
Mr. Matzkin?
The only difference between Greg and Mary, of course, is 2-year versus 3-year. I'd prefer to take a longer term average and go with Greg's calculation. They're quite close, but more data is better or better.
Well, I don't like to question my seatmate here, but if I throw in one more year, oh, you threw in 17, which was the higher year. I mean, that's just skewing it higher. I mean, because if you look, it was lower in 16. So.
No, but it allows for more smoothing. I mean, years are going to be better and worse, No,
I understand that. But I mean, that being said, if you really want to get technical and go from a standpoint of equalization, all the other buildings were assessed without the 2019 information. And that actually, if you just use the 3-year average, it comes in even lower than what either one of us are suggesting. So.
Yeah, and Ken, I'm actually with Mary's approach. I was just explaining what I was doing as the math I was doing to come up with my number. But I actually prefer Mary's approach here. It's still a $3 million increase from last year.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big, and the jump has been every single year with this property. So.
As well, it should be increasing. I just don't think it should be increasing at that rate. Mr. Penaranda, you had a comment?
Yeah, pretty much what Ken was saying. I think most of the adjustments that we made for other buildings were based on 3-year averages, and that's what I was doing. I did an average. I even did a 4-year average, but I wasn't really counting on that. But doing a 3-year average on NOIs, it comes up to 11,587,989. Doing an average 3-year average on expenses, it comes to 3,844,357. The county is using much less than that on expenses. So what I did is I increased the expenses to 25% on the apartments. I left the retail the same, but increasing the expenses at 25% gives me a little more than the average for the past 3 years, 3,868,000. And then when I use that to come up to the NOI, on the apartments, I come up with 11,605,000, which I think it's more in line with the average for the past 3 years. So when I cap that, I come up to just on the apartments, so 212,952,000, and if I add the retail, I come up with a final value of 213,848. And that's pretty much based on doing the 3-year average, which we did for other buildings.
Okay, I don't agree with it, but I see where you're coming from. Mr. Lawson, you had a comment?
Yes, ma'am. I thought the applicant presented a very fair and probably conservative case, and I would be supportive of your analysis.
With the 2-year average.
Yes.
Yeah.
Of the 210,908?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. I'm clicking my mute on and off.
Okay. No, because I don't want it to revert back, so,
Well, I would be more inclined to accept the appellant's numbers in this case, to be honest.
okay, so there's, you got two there. Ms. Hogan?
Yeah, I'm with the appellant's numbers as well.
Okay, so you got three, so we've got, so Barnes, you're okay with the 210? Greg and
Yeah.
Mark?
Yes.
Okay, then, because I don't want this to revert back, so we do have, okay. So then I'm going to make a motion to reduce the assessment to 210,908,900.
Got a second?
Okay, so
210 million.
210,908,900. So a motion and a second by Mr. Hoffman. All in favor?
Aye.
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 And opposed?
Aye.
So it is 5-2, and that's without Mr. Matskin and Mr. Penaranda. And that's not because you're opposed to it, you just wanted it to not be lowered quite that far.
Right.
Okay, so the assessment's been reduced to 210,908,900.
And that's based
Okay.
on two-year average, right?
No, that's based on a 2-year average.
Okay.
And for the original assessment. Okay, so gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
as far as, before we sign off, just,
Thank you, board members.
thank you, Mr. Chikas.
Thank you.
Just for the record to show, I didn't realize this, on the first 4 cases that we did the withdrawal, they're actually 6-0, not 7-0. Mr. Lawson wasn't able to get on with either voice or camera. So when I said opposed, I didn't hear him. So since they were just withdrawals and it's unanimous anyway, I don't think we need to recall those votes. So that's fine. It's more than enough to accept the withdrawals. So any other business from board members? Mr. Hoffman.
Have you received the cases for tomorrow?
I was just going to say tomorrow's, there is no hearing for tomorrow.
Oh, okay.
And so
That would
we
explain it.
will come back with Tuesday and Wednesday of next week.
Okay, good.
There's just been so many withdrawals and acceptance. We're doing quite well. We will definitely finish on time.
What will I do with all the spare time?
I don't know. So any other business from board members? No, anything from the county? Okay, then we will adjourn at 10:07 and we will re-adjourn next Tuesday, September 29th at 9 a.m. Okay, thanks everybody.
Bye.
Have a good week.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.